Hey all, Cinder here. This video will cover my synopsis for how I would adapt James and the Diesel engines for Thomas and Friends. I know that it has been ages since I first mentioned making this adaptation, but that is because I have since been made aware of several other content creators' fantastic interpretations and adaptations of these stories, and thus I wanted to wait until I had something a tad more unique for myself, instead of just assuming that no one else had done the same. If you enjoy my content and want to see more like it in the future, then don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring Toby's bell to stay notified for when I post new content. Now then, with all of that out of the way, let's get started. So this book is the 28th installment in the Railway series, and was the second book to be written by Christopher Awdry after he took over the role as author from his father Wilbert. This book takes place during the decade in which it was written, the 1980s. At this point in time, diesels were the main form of rail transportation on British railways. By this point, most of the Fat Controller's engines had accepted diesels, except James. And so, the book covers James's prejudice against diesel engines and how he overcomes it. This is a neat concept, but one that the book doesn't handle very well. Hopefully, my adaptation can fix that. So the first story is called Old Stuck Up. This serves as a nice reintroduction to the callousness and arrogance of some diesels. One day, Boco shows one such diesel from the mainland around. When the visitor finds out that he would have to share the shed with steam engines, he refuses to do so and instead spends the night outside, leading to James nicknaming him with the story's title. Next day, the diesel waits almost all day before entering the shed to be cleaned and oiled. Thinking that the coast is clear, he enters the shed, only to slide on a pile of ash left behind by Boco or Bear, which then results in Old Stuck Up crashing through the back of the shed. That night, the engines have a good laugh about the incident and joke about the Fat Controller giving the visitor shit for the accident. This is a decent start to the book, and actually allows for a nice segue into the subsequent tale. Cross Lines is next. After Old Stuck Up's incident, James starts bad-mouthing diesel engines. The others try to reason with the red engine, but to no avail. James in turn becomes more and more big-headed than ever, which results in the others actually being glad when he's away. One foggy day, James is forced to shunt his own train. As the annoyed engine is doing so, he gets into an accident, which results in him knocking over a signal. This puts an end to his cockiness and spending the night in the shed in complete silence. Don't get me wrong, I get what this story is trying to do. James is trying to prove his superiority over diesels at the start, only to come to the realization that he isn't so superior. There is a nice joke at the end, where the engines joke about James travelling in two directions, in stark contrast to diesels with two cabs travelling in one. I don't mind this story, but I feel that it doesn't quite connect with the latter half of the book due to its structure. Now, Fire Engine is a fun story. However, it doesn't really fit in with the theme of this book. The story focuses on the rivalry between James and Henry. One night, Henry makes fun of James's red paint, claiming that he looks like a fire engine. In turn, James mocks Henry's green paint, which brings everyone else into a fit of laughter. This puts Henry in a foul mood for the whole of the next day. He treats the coaches roughly, which eventually results in his tender coupling breaking and his fire spilling out onto the rails. After the fire brigade puts the fire out, Edward takes his train on, and Henry slowly makes his way home with a temporary tender coupling. The story ends with James noticing that Henry no longer makes rude remarks on the colour of fire engines. I do like this story, especially since the James and Henry rivalry is one of the more fun aspects of Chris's books. However, this one sadly doesn't have anything to do with the book's premise. That being said, I do understand why Chris chose to include a Henry story. Chris often played with the rivalry between Henry and James, and went as far to include a story about each character in the other's respective book. Henry gets Fire Engine in James's book, and James gets Sliding Scales in Henry's book. The difference in that book, however, is that the story actually relates to the theme of that book, since it focuses on James covering Henry's duties while he's away at the works. This one doesn't quite achieve that same level of success, despite how fun it is. The final story, Deep Freeze, is the one where James finally overcomes his prejudice of diesels, and it is unfortunately a bit underwhelming. James takes on too much water in the winter, which leads to his filler cap freezing over, and as a result, he breaks down. A diesel from the works comes to rescue him, much to James's dismay. However, after talking to the diesel on the way to the works, James realizes that some diesels are actually okay. The reason why this story falls flat is because the diesel that changes James's mind is a complete stranger. A stranger who we never even see the face of, nor learn the name of. Well, we do see his face in a later book, but that's besides the point. If this had been an already established character, it would have held a lot more weight, but as it stands, it's sadly a bit of a letdown to what was otherwise a promising book. As I said at the start, I've put off making this video for so long because I've seen so many of the great adaptations of these stories, and I personally don't want to step on anyone's toes. So to be clear, I have taken some inspiration from other content creators, but I have still tried to put my own spin on things. So, here we go. As is the case with most of my Railway series adaptation videos, my interpretation would be set during the model series. For Old Stuck Up and Crossed Lines, I would have taken a page out of Season 1's book and combined the two stories into one episode. My version would take place in Season 2. It would mostly be adapted beat for beat, with the obvious exclusion of Bear's name being mentioned, as he sadly does not exist in the TV series. The other exclusion would be the mentioning of James disliking all diesels except Boco, which never really made sense to me.
Boco and Bear were proud of this, but James was not impressed. He liked these two diesels, but he treated all others with deep suspicion.
In place of Old Stuck Up himself, I would have used Daisy in between her debut episode and Percy's predicament. Much like how she scoffs at the engine shed that Percy and Toby showed her, she does the same when she visits the one on the main line. We'll say that she spent the night in a siding and slipped on her own oil in the morning, which resulted in her smashing up a signal whilst travelling across two tracks. The episode could end with James being the one to make the remark about travelling two ways at once. Also, to avoid Daisy receiving a scolding from the Fat Controller, we'll say that it takes place during the week in which he is away at the start of Percy and the Signal.
The Fat Controller told me to stay here. He sent a message this morning. He did not. How could he? He's away for a week.
I know that Percy wasn't relocated to Thomas's branch line at this point in the books, but there is nothing in the episode to conflict with this idea, barring the episode's airing order, which is already all over the place in Season 2, so it doesn't really matter. Having the episode structured this way would allow for Boco to be used in the same episode, as his model along with Daisy's actually shared the same chassis, which is why we never see them on screen together. Or if that is too complex, then we could just say that James is the one who is ordered to show her around. Since the Fat Controller is away, Daisy can be scolded by an inspector or yard foreman instead. I feel like Season 2 would be a good place for James's diesel prejudice to be set up. Diesel would have already left a bad taste in his and everyone else's mouth earlier in the season, and this would only add fuel to the fire. Having a bad experience with more than one diesel in the same season would give James more of a concrete reason to hate them. Next, I want to quickly mention how Buzz would also be used as part of my James and the Diesels saga. Taking place in Season 3, we get to see that James still has a low opinion on diesels.
Are you afraid of bees? They're only insects after all, so don't let that buzzbox diesel tell you different.
I would also use Season 4's Rock and Roll for the same purpose, using the scene where James talks to Duncan about Diesel. By including these two stories, we actually get to see that James's prejudice of diesels has been lasting for quite a while. Season 5 already had a good few James focused episodes, so we'll skip over it and move on to Season 6, in which I want to address the episode Middle Engine. I know everybody hates this episode, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of it either, but for the purpose of this video, I think it actually works, since it shows James having another bad experience with diesels, this time being Arian Burt. Thus I feel like it would make James's eventual turnaround have even more of an impact. Fire Engine can take place in this season. The teasing that occurs at the beginning can be a reference to James's incident with the burning oil tankers in Season 5. this could be a good way to include the fire engine joke. The rest of the story would play out as per the book, only this time James arrives instead of Edward, bringing with him the fire brigade. Since the story in the book ends with James getting the last laugh against Henry, this would work quite well in my opinion. We could also have James throw in a cheeky one-liner saying something like, "I guess I really am a fire engine now." Since the original version of this story doesn't really have anything to do with James's diesel prejudice, and simply exists as a fun rivalry story between him and Henry, I didn't feel the need to include any diesel characters. Although I suppose if you wanted to, you could swap out Henry for another diesel. Maybe the Class 40 on a return visit? Who knows. Now as for Deep Freeze, I wanted to leave this episode specifically for Season 7, and there's actually a couple of reasons for this. For starters, it's the last of the classic seasons, and thus I think it would be fitting to close this arc for James here. Secondly, it would follow on nicely into the hit era, where in James's first Spotlight episode, he helps Diesel out without showing any prejudice whatsoever. This, I feel, would really help to highlight James's new perspective on diesels. I also feel like having James overcome his prejudice of diesels in the last classic season would add some more weight to his story, since at this point in time, he has had nothing but bad or negative experiences with every diesel that he has met, even if you don't include my hypothetical adaptations, and this story would have even more of an impact. But the big question is, who is it that's going to make James overcome such prejudice? Well, see if you can guess. Now this story is going to have a few details tweaked in order for it to work. At the start, James is at Croven's gate talking to Duncan when Rusty passes by, greeting his yellow colleague, and as he does so, provides him with a warning that the line may be slippery due to ice, and that there have been a lot of icicles forming inside tunnels. Duncan thanks him as he leaves, only for James to scoff and question why Duncan would take orders from a diesel. Duncan claps back, defending his friend, saying that not all diesels are bad. As a side note, I think that this would make for a nice character moment for Duncan, since at this point in time, Rusty has already won him over twice. This would be a nice way to show that level of character growth. James leaves the station, only for his steam to cause icicles in a tunnel to melt and drip all over his tender, which then refreeze once he's back out in the cold. His wheels slip on the icy rails, and as he tries to get a grip, his injector fails. After help has been called, Rusty arrives with some workmen to put sand on the rails and fix James's filler cap. James expects Rusty to make fun of him, only for the little diesel to comfort him. "Never mind, James, it could have happened to any engine." James is taken aback by this, and is slowly won over as the pair talk. Once he's ready to go, James thanks Rusty as he leaves. He returns to Croven's gate that evening, admitting to Duncan that there are in fact some good diesels out there. And thus, the episode ends on a positive note. Now you might be wondering, why Rusty and not someone like Boco? Well, it's simple. As I already stated, Rusty has been known to win over another rude and prejudiced Steamie. Plus, he is one of only 2 diesels that James hadn't met in the series at this point. But I feel like Salty wouldn't have worked as well, and would have been a lot harder to fit. I have also considered having this story broken up into a 2-parter, so that we could maybe have a slight montage of sorts at the end of the second half, where we see James befriending other diesels. Honestly, either way works for me. Well, after a long ass time, I've finally done it. I hope that you guys found this video to be worth the wait. Thank you all so much for your patience. Now in case you didn't see my update video earlier this year, or have simply forgotten, October is going to be a month dedicated to Tugs content, named Tugs Month. It's been the best time to be a Tugs fan over the past few years, plus it is my birth month, so it just seemed fitting. I'm aiming and hoping to have 1 video out per week, so keep your eyes peeled. I'm planning on releasing a trailer for it in the near future, so don't forget to keep your notifications switched on as not to miss it. Anyways, until next time, I've been Cinders and Ashes UK, you've been awesome, and have a great day. Bye!